Hello, hello. Good afternoon into the good evening, and welcome everybody. I'm so happy to welcome you all to the 2021 Maurice Brown Poetry Reading featuring Mary Ann Samyn. I want to say how lovely, almost emotional it is to be in the same room with everybody here. It's been a long time, and I can kind of feel like the energy and the love, and it's really nice. We also have a really wonderful Zoom crowd. Hello, hello to the Zoom, and thank you so much for coming. I want to start with some thank yous. I want to thank the English department and the creative writing program for the continued support of the Maurice Brown Poetry Series. I want to thank Dean Carey and Associate Dean Joe Shively for all they do for the College of Arts and Sciences. I want to thank Leslie Galen, our administrative assistant in the English department, who helped me so much with this event, especially as we shifted from our tentative tent plan, which did not work out. And here we are in this cozy space as the weather shifted and the mud rose up in the event space. We are here, but I really want to thank Leslie for helping make all of this happen pretty quickly inside this room. I also want to thank Xander Buckingham at Event Services for his help. And most of all, I want to thank Tilda Brown Swanson and Judy Brown, who are joining us via Zoom. Hello, Judy. Hello, Tilda. I'm just going to swirl around so you guys can see the room. Everybody wave to our Zoom. Look at our lovely crowd. All right, let me see if I pulled that off. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, so thank you. Hello. As many of you know, this reading series would not be possible without Judy Brown having begun it in loving memory of her husband, Maurice Brown, an English professor here at Oakland. Judy, also a professor. Judy and her daughter, Tilda, who also helped this reading series grow and continue, are watching from Iowa. And so thank you, Judy. Thank you, Tilda, for your support. And we can feel your love and spirit of poetry here with us today. We will have a short Q&A after the reading, but I also want to let you know that Mary Ann invites questions during the reading. So if at any point a poem grabs you or an idea grabs you, raise your hand and she would love to chat as the reading unfolds as well. There are also books for sale in the back, and she will be happy to sign those after the reading. Before I have the pleasure of introducing Mary Ann, I finally want to point out that we have our 10th anniversary posters around the room. Please take one and share them with your friends. This is the Creative Writing Program's 10th anniversary this year. Woohoo! 2021 marks 2021 marks the 10th anniversary. So we're going to be celebrating this year by having alums and recent CW graduates, our publication roundtable. All of our events are listed there, and we hope to see you throughout the year to woohoo for creative writing. And now, today we get the pleasure of hearing the poems of Mary Ann Samyn, whom Donald Ravel has called the Constantine Cavafy of our moment. Gregory Orr has said of Mary Ann's most recent collection, it's as if Rilke took a vow to speak only in end-stopped sentences. Some of the best voices in contemporary poetry always are comparing Mary Ann's work to the best voices of the past, and adding the unique experience of reading Samyn's poetry, those end-stopped lines, those internal pauses, the glittering cohesion of each tightly crafted turn, jolts you through a Mary Ann Samyn poem. In our class, we've talked about how lyric poems often have turns, and sometimes it's as if every line in a Mary Ann Samyn poem is its own turn. Earlier today in her great craft talk, she advised young writers that Metaphors are for emergencies. And yet when I teach Mary Ann's poetry, I often talk about it metaphorically. I talk about turns, I talk about threads being woven together. Also makes me think of the ancient Greek word rhapsode, which was an ancient performer of poetry, related to the Greek verb to weave. And so woven thoughts and woven words, woven strands of existence are all coming together in her poems. When we read them, at first, this flurry, this spark, this lull of lines almost feels unrecognizable or unfamiliar. But then the longer we stay in it, we realize we recognize all this. We recognize this spark, this longing for cohesion, which her poems give us. Gertrude Stein once wrote, "What is a nail? A nail is unison." And that's a Mary Ann Samyn poem as well. The unison of nails. You are in for a treat of connections, communions, contradictions. In one of her poems, more powerfully, she wrote, "My resilience exhausts me." And I think after, especially coming together after this time where we've been separated for so long, that line really resonates. Mary Ann Samyn is the author of 6 full-length collections of poetry: Air, Light, Dust, Shadow, Distance, winner of the 2017 42 Miles Press Poetry Award; My Life in Heaven, winner of the 2012 Field Poetry Prize; Beauty Breaks In, new issues; Purr, also new issues; Inside the Yellow Dress, Captivity Narrative, which was the winner of the Journal Ohio State University Press Prize, and 2 chapbooks, The Boom of a Small Cannon and Rooms by the Sea. Her poems have appeared in Field, Colorado Review, American Literary Review, Kenyon Review, the Ohio Review, the Journal, and other many top shelf journals in American literature. She received her MA from Ohio University and her MFA from the University of Virginia, where she was a Hoynes Fellow. Among her awards are a Creative Artist Grant from ArtServe Michigan, the Emily Dickinson Prize from the Poetry Society of America, the James Wright Poetry Award from Mid-American Review, and a Pushcart Prize. I want to quote one more time from her poem, "Now We Are Allowed," again in this moment of joining together after being apart for so many readings. Her poem, "Now We Are Allowed," the ending reads, "Effortlessness seems true, generosity, the existence of the world. This is wisdom, that solitude, which also joins me to you." Please join me in welcoming OU's own Mary Ann Samyn.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Can you hear me? Okay, good. And hi to our Zoom audience. So many people to thank. First of all, to Katie for writing to me out of the blue, it seemed, to invite me to do this reading, which was such a nice surprise. And I know how special the reading is to so many people here. So special thanks also to Judy Brown and Tilda Brown Swanson for their continued support of the reading and of writers and of the writing community here in honor of Maurice Brown. As you know, I think I went to Oakland and I graduated in 1992, which is shocking. I think one of the first times that I was on campus was to take the math placement exam in O'Dowd, and I did too well. That was not my intention, and I was placed in Calc 1, which is really a low time for me. I had no idea what was going on in there, and everybody else did. They were like going forward in that way. But also in that very first semester, I met Jane Eberwain, who is a life-changing person. As many of you know, I know she and Bob are with us on Zoom. And I took what was then called English 224, I believe American Literature, with her, and other classes as well. So other than the time in Calc, I had a great experience at Oakland, and I want to mention some of my truly wonderful teachers, some of whom are here today. Jane and Bob, of course, who are also dear friends of mine. And I was once upon a time their cat sitter, and no cat died under my watch. Although one of the cats I remember used to sit under a lamp and put her head right next to the light bulb, which seemed alarming to me, but the cat was fine. Also, from those old days, Ed Hepner, Dave Massatelli, Brian Connery, who's here today, Natalie Cole, Kevin Grimm, Nigel Hampton, Brian Murphy. Thank you so much to all of you, and others from other departments as well. I recall a lot of what you all taught me, and I can see and feel myself back there in your classrooms. And Brian Connery, I was thinking about the class, I think I had an 8 a.m. class with you on 18th century, which is pretty early in the day for that kind of thing. And I remember it very clearly. It was in South Foundation Hall, yep, on the parking lot side of the building. And also, it's been great to get to know Katie, and I think that that will continue. It seems like a real connection, and it's great to see my friend Pete Marcus. Pete and I have known each other for 20 some years and used to spend time every summer in the woods up north teaching kids to write, and it was exactly how you can imagine that might be. And I want to thank Leslie in the department for her help as well. Putting on a reading is it's not just you show up and it works out. But most of all, I want to thank you all. And the tent sounded, I love the tent idea. It sounds kind of romantic, and the only problem with the room is that we don't have a window. So when the weather comes and we need a metaphor, it's going to be harder to get it. But anyway, it's been great. And to those who came this morning to the craft talk, that was great as well. Okay. Katie was very generous in the amount of reading time, but I also know that it's hard to listen to poetry. For a long time, I feel that way. So I'm going to read a little bit, invite your questions, read a little bit more. We'll see how it goes. Okay. All right. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote in 1998 or so, and it was one of those poems that I was teaching actually here at the time. I came back and taught rhetoric, or whatever they call it now here, for 3 years, and that was a great education in and of itself, to do that much teaching. And I wrote this poem during that time, and I remember thinking, oh, that's a step forward. That poem is going to take me someplace else. And it's still one of my all-time favorite poems that I would take to the desert island with me if I had to do that. People often say, like, what book would you take with you to the desert island? And I have to tell you, I would take one of my own, because those are the questions that I still have. Right? Which sounds so terrible, but I think you have to think that if you're a writer. It's such a difficult business. The business side of writing is just brutal. You've got to have that kind of hold on yourself. This is a poem in 4 little sections. When the soul comes out of the body. So then I pressed the moment a little harder to see if what had been kept, lion house, meat smell, fury, might now go free. Later, there were many questions, such as, when exactly is quick over? And why does the metallic taste of an ache linger? But mostly it was the problem of having used my hands, of having tried to tame it. First, I thought about the hollow one way. Okay, fine, scenic. Then I thought about it another. Sometimes my mouth makes a bad noise, like the sound of its leaving. Let's see where we are in time. I'm going to move ahead now and read some poems from this My Life in Heaven book. So I teach at West Virginia University, and this is my 20th year there, actually. And, you know, West Virginia is almost heaven. So when this book came out, there were a lot of people there who thought it was about West Virginia, and certainly some of the poems take place in there, but I actually wrote the title poem up north at Glen Lake. And it was an interesting example of, like, oh, people think one thing and you're thinking something else. Okay. My Life in Heaven. This is a true account beginning now. Here's a birch basket, tens of feathers, none of which will ever belong again. This is like that, only more so. Once I was a little girl who tried to write it. Now I do 20 years worth of looking every afternoon. Like the insect that shed its before on the sand and unstuck its wings, 2 pairs. Time can't be wasted. Some changes are forever. The lake's 3 greens, no, and its darker churning and its eyelet edge. Given the chance, I'd wear that to meet you. This next poem I wrote in a hotel, like a Hampton Inn or something, one of that kind of thing, in Kent, Ohio. I'd gone to do a reading in Kent, and if you go to do readings, there's always like some downtime in the hotel and things like that. And, you're just like, there's really not a lot to do. So you'll get some of that in here. And then also I visited a class, and when you're the visitor to a class, it's awesome. You can just say anything because you can leave, right? And you don't have to like follow it up and like grade it later on and deal with the consequences. You can really tell it like it is. And then of course I was thinking about Keats, as one often does, especially this time of year, right? This is called Stupidity, Crabbiness, Moorings, and Love. One possible Jesus was Jesus, stubbornly. For argument's sake, the clouds moved very fast. Good show, I wanted to say. The clarity is inside you, is what I said instead. The professor and students nodded yes and no, like when your mouth opened against mine. Keats was awfully young when he wrote those letters. I am frequently reminded. What can I say? Seduction circa 1819 still sounds good. The worst of it is mostly private. Of what? I asked myself, then snapped a photo in the hotel mirror. Right as the pandemic was starting, at West Virginia, they were going to cut down some historic trees on campus because they were supposedly going to fall on people and kill them or whatever. And I personally felt like that would be a good way to go, but so this was happening like right around, you remember, like the pandemic was happening, starting up, and spring break. And this was a little news thing put into our, what we call e-news, our daily roundup of things you don't really want to read about. And I saw this thing about these historic trees, including the sycamore from 1819. Speaking of 1819, I was like, what? No, not my sycamore. And it has a little plaque on it and everything. And so I decided to write to the WVU president, who is Gordon Gee, who some of you academic types might know from his Ohio State days or his Vanderbilt days or his controversies at various schools. Anyway, I wrote to him and I said, dear Gordon, it's come to my attention that we're going to cut down the sycamore. And he said he did not know. Maybe. And he said he would immediately look into it, of course. And the sycamore, I have to tell you, was cut down. Of course, when everybody was teaching on Zoom and everything, when nobody could watch because it was a beautiful tree. But part of my argument to him about why we should keep it alive, even though it could kill somebody and the university would be sued for that, I was like, well, that's on one hand. But on the other hand, 1819, and I said to him in an email, Keats was alive in the same time as this tree. And he was like, Professor Samyn, that's really, I appreciate your enthusiasm for that. He always takes an interest in our publications and stuff. So that's handy, because then later you can be like, hi, remember me? I'm the one with the poems. Don't tear down that tree. Okay. This is a poem called She Named It Beauty. So it got easier when I stopped believing everything I thought and took a drive just because that might feel good. Even the new loneliness was pretty nice and calmed me, like the cherry blossoms when they fell. I'd been unhappy here and there, I realized, which set me down gently. In ordering a bouquet for someone else, I knew what I'd prefer. The actual flowers could come later. There is no safety. Your heart may break. Mine may. I think all art is about this. Perfection never did interest me much, but I have to ask, are you seeing this sunset? I'm going to move on to a different book. So this book, Airlight, Dust, Shadow, Distance, it takes its title from a Denise Levertov essay. in which she says one needs to take into account air, light, dust, shadow, distance on things. And of course, I agree with that. I'm going to read some poems from this book, and then I'm going to ask you if you have any questions. So now's the time to form. This is called Long Sunday. It's one thing to be the space for heartache, another to invent it. The two fawns said, don't. Then for a while, some wind took my attention, and the female cardinal who probably wasn't lost. In the illustrated forest, the treetops look sooty, but that's not the worry. I never can remember the point of fairy tales. Some people thrive on distraction. What is the nature of my fear? I was almost there, not quite. For years to come. Walking in the dawn fog, considering grief, especially the grief of what others desire on our behalf, the long distance of that, the delicate burden. When did I give up the idea I began with? I recall learning endurance, my face in that mirror. Saints are famous for what they have renounced. That's not what I mean or need. The rose bushes I planted, will they be the thing? Sometimes loneliness overcomes me. Childhood, too, what was that all about? The interior life is life. The roses live there. I notice as many times a day as it takes. When I was talking with the students today, we talked about the weather a little bit. I love to think about the weather and to notice the weather, and that's why it's too bad that we only have like an angle of light and not an actual window. It's very hard to teach a poetry workshop without a window. I have found occasionally I've had to teach it in a basement room and prospects are bleak, you know what I'm saying? And I often have my class, I often teach from 4 to 7, and undergrads or grads, and we usually take a break at whatever time sunset is, figure out what time it is, and we go outside to see it because we're poets and we have to do that kind of thing. Right. So. The sky at home. Presently, I am living inside a tenderness. Time was, I had called it suffering. What makes something so? Time-worn narratives do the work of a god. One can't know how one is loved. The feather you brought back is a mystery. This is August, still and all. Sometimes a familiar song drifts over the treetops. I know just what you mean, I want to say. Life is poignant like that, little by little. Keats shows up again. Poets always love Keats, right? He's our favorite. A romantic notion. A strong wind uses the dogwood to sound itself out. I walk in the yard one last time before bed to feel it. Private passion, said Keats, is what gives meaning. I follow my feelings until, chastened, I don't. One day, a little rabbit appears for us out of nowhere. We name him, but we don't own him. He's free to go. Stan Plumley, the poet Stan Plumley, who is also a scholar of Romanticism, he always says that Keats's To Autumn is the most perfect poem in the English language, which is, Plumley says a lot of things like that, which are great for class because then you can like discuss them and argue them and stuff. And he says that all poems are elegies and all American poems are self-elegies, which is probably true, right? Okay, so what was going on in this book and in the book before it? You know, I was caught up with myself as one is and does. And then in the midst of being caught up in my own like sagas and dramas and whatnot, my dad had a stroke. It was actually October 18th in 2014. And it was obviously a life-changing event for him and for all of us. And truly, my life became wildly different at that point. And my dad survived, which was not what he would have preferred. And he lived for another about 1,000 days, unable to walk or talk. And so it was like one day he was, the night before he had the stroke, in fact, I was in West Virginia and we had a visiting writer that week, and I had like seen to that writer's needs or whatever, and saw the students off and to deal with all that. And then I called my dad and he told me he had been at Meyer, the one in Royal Oak, and he said he had this feeling like he didn't want to faint in the line at Meyer. Right, who does, right? And he better get home, right? And then usual kind of conversation, I'll talk to you tomorrow, honey, or whatever. And then that was the last time I spoke with him. And he had the stroke. And those people who in the audience who know about that kind of thing, I mean, what was most alarming was how often he was treated in hospitals and care settings. I mean, kindly, but then also a whole bunch of people who treated him like he was an idiot, even though 24 hours ago, 40 days, he was perfectly fine and, had a PhD and all this kind of stuff. And so we were constantly like telling his story to people, like trying to get respect for him and everything. Anyway, those early days, of course, we thought he was going to die at any minute. And that was like really upsetting. And then later when it became clear that he wasn't going to, and he was just going to suffer a lot, that became very upsetting. So this was kind of the first poem that I was able to write about that. And when it first happened, I didn't write probably for 6 or 9 months. I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror. My face looked like a mosaic or something. My dad had been my person for sure. And it was a huge loss. It's a little poem called Sitting Beside My Father After the Stroke. Then it came time to hold the suffering. So long, ordinary heartache, my boon companion. Moon and stars, I see you. Wait up. This is autumnal, by which I mean vibrant. The maple leaf I bring, he inspects and sets down. My face he cups. Christ is his hand. Beautiful secret something. I hold my problem. My jaw aches with it. Things end with no regard for me. This is the way. I bake, I mend. The dough lies on the wooded hillside. Pretend as I may, she isn't me. I wake each night for an hour to grieve. I think to cut something exquisite from the pain and carry just that. Leave the rest in a heap. Come morning, I understand. Part of the mystery has gone deeper. Part of the mystery is in plain sight. So let's take a little break, and any questions or concerns? That's what I would say if I were teaching. Questions or concerns? Yeah, Annie?
I just wondered what kind of feather that was. 5 pearls?
Yeah, the feather, it was a turkey feather, actually. It was a turkey feather from someone hunting and bringing back. Yeah.
I remember from earlier in the talk, you said that we're interested in mystery less, and like I can tell that like a lot of your poems say that we deal with like an unanswered question, and we like find why there is some mystery and something really.
From mystery? Well, there's a lot of it. Don't you feel? I mean, the older you get, the more that there seems to be, it seems to me. Poems, I think I kind of tried to talk about this in the craft talk. I said that, you're trying to be prepared to be surprised. You're trying to get your mind right and notice what there is to notice. And so in the craft talk, we noticed all kinds of just sensory things. And then the weather and things like that, so that we could be surprised by something. because if you're going around thinking about the big mystery, I mean, part of the reason like I couldn't write after my dad had the stroke is, first of all, my life was vastly different. And suddenly we had all these, I never met so many strangers as during the time that he was alive and dealing with, you know, it was constantly somebody else walking in the room and doing something to him or asking something of us. And it was totally a new world and experience. But, you know, when you're sort of like deep in the mystery at that point, what you need is actually not more of that, but more grounding, right? More weather, more frogs in the pond, as I talked about earlier today. So I think most poems are a mixture of that. Poems are not about what you already know. They're about what you don't know about, you know, the thing that you're close to. Like, I'm close to my dad. I know him in all these ways. If I'm just going to write a poem, though, that like praises him as a person, that's not actually a poem. That's like an editorial or something, or a eulogy, or it's not a poem. A poem is, what don't I know? How did I, you know, meet him, understand him and myself further by this experience? Which I was just saying to somebody just the other day that this is not something I would say a lot, maybe within my own family, because we have this agreement, and I do agree to it, that my dad was just an incredible person. Just things that he did, and the kindness and the depth of his character, like hands down, best person I've ever met. But I did think at the time, and I've certainly thought since, like, oh, you know, okay, so even the stroke is a gift in some way, you know, I suppose. What is it that he is lacking or whatever? Because some people would say, well, you know, he needed to suffer. And I was just like, no, that is not the case. And I was like, well, you know, the one thing he's not really received in his life is much care. He's given a lot, but he's not received it. So now he is being forcibly asked to receive care from a bunch of incompetent people, including his children, and a bunch of competent people, and to have that. Something he never had as a child. His mom died when he was very young. He never really had it as an adult. And to not be the one in charge and to accept the care in that. So, you know, exploring that kind of mystery and being like, who is he further? And seeing him struggle with that and not, that's where the poem is. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a long way around about kind of, yes.
Good answer.
Okay, good. Yes, the poems are sites of mystery. And usually at the end of a poem, you know something more and something less, I would say. Okay, let's continue on. I'm going to read you some poems from a manuscript that I have circulating right now, and it's called The Return from Calvary. And the book has two epigraphs. One is from Johnny Mercer from the Moon River song. My dad loved that song after he had his stroke. I've heard it thousands of times, and he actually, when he died at home. That song was actually playing when he died. So I'm sure many of you know the words. Moon River, wider than a mile. I'm crossing you in style someday. Oh, dream maker, you heartbreaker. Wherever you're going, I'm going your way. And then the other epigraph is from Jackson Browne from his song Barricades of Heaven. Better bring your own redemption when you come. So this is the title poem. My grandmother, my mom's mom, had this super scary painting in her living room that was called The Return from Calvary. And it was a very stylized, like from 1911 or so, kind of painting of Mary and the other women dressed like in Greek garb, like leaving the crucifixion, all in a very dark palette, super scary looking painting, which I never liked. And then once my dad had the stroke and the suffering, I was like, oh, I understand that painting. The Return from Calvary. Sunset too in a low key, a little wait, what? I'm thinking of my father, everything he'll ever say now said. And of the painting of the sorrow I was so afraid of. Days and weeks to come, we can't imagine for our own good. Something persists, something grows tender, nothing explains itself. As in the hospital, early and late, such disbelief. The bars of the bed are for railing against. his fist found out. God is sensible but not reasonable. Everywhere I look. So I have a couple poems about this experience. I was in the room when my dad died, which I wanted to do. I had, it was in December, and I had come home and was sort of finishing out the semester and doing final grading, you know, kind of waiting there. We knew he was going to die. And right after it happened, or shortly thereafter, so he died at home. I don't know if you know about that. His Oakland County, you have to have someone come and declare the death because of Dr. Kevorkian days and everything. Someone has to come and make sure there was no foul play. So it's not like it's over right away. It's like, okay, now a hospice has to come and declare the death. Now a police officer actually has to come to the house. And there's a lot of sitting around, strangely enough. And I was sitting in the kitchen alone, and my brother, who had been there, had gone off to do something. And I felt my dad in the corner of the kitchen. And that's kind of referenced in this poem and in a couple others. Visionary. Is this the way at the end? An arm up, and he's not reaching for you. The soul looking around, it seemed. His chest had not moved that way before. The sound in his body and in the house, and not stopping until it stopped. I was doing, I can't remember what, when I came to my senses. Did he want me with him? I tell myself so. Recall whole years of my head on his knee. I think now he might have stayed a little longer just to see himself there upon the bed. Or when I said, what? Minutes later in the kitchen, to no one who pulled the string that lifted my face. It goes without saying, on that snowy evening, like nothing I've ever seen. I wrote this poem when I was driving from the Pittsburgh airport back to Morgantown, West Virginia, where I live, and it was a kind of snowy evening and stuff, and I saw some deer up on one of the ridges. The poem's in two sections, 6 lines each. 7 deer on a ridge. Right after, from the upper corner of the kitchen where I suppose he waited, it was as though he called my name, or lifted my face as he had often done. And I said, what? Just what? To my father. Then promised again I would not give up. Vivid winter evening sky, a man's blue. I know that because of him. He's gone ahead. It wasn't what we wanted. He loved me, despite how I failed him. Surely he will come back. These deer, here for the moment, must mean that. A few years ago, West Virginia, we had occasion to hire another poet when a colleague had retired. And I was the search chair. As those of you who've been a search chair know, it's nothing but administrative caca. It's no fun at all. The only fun part was that I did not have to answer, I did not have to ask one of our scripted questions, because I was the other poet and the search chair. I could ask a question of my choosing. So I asked this question to everybody: what is poetry, and why do you write it? Which alarmed the job candidates, which is like super fun. You know, once you have a job, you're just like, let's bring it on. So after hearing all these answers, and they were great answers and everything, I was like, oh, I should answer that question. So here's a little poem called "What is Poetry, and Why Do You Write It?" Finally, the sky calms down, and a voice I love comes around a corner. Or the air is pink, like time. Or evening's last light on that hill, minus its leaves, the shape of the tree. I remember how my ex-husband told me no. Out of disbelief, I gathered myself. It hardly matters now what I wanted. So I've had a lot of dreams about my dad. And also my mom died last summer and she is in dreams too. And this poem kind of started from that. It's called Direct, Sincere, Unassuming, True. Then I climbed back down and he went on. Later, I saw him, the 5 petals of a common flower. Later still, a kind of magnolia I hadn't known. What could be better, I guess? Looking for him didn't work. I had to wait. There was so much in between. Some kindnesses hit hard. The clerk who called me honey. I didn't know how I'd go on, and did go on. The weather provided continuing interest. Rain, which I like, happened mostly overnight. In the morning, the grass was wet. I must have slept. How are you feeling? You okay? What's that? Well, okay, good. So this poem kind of harkens back to like something terrible happens in your life, and then you're like, yeah, but it's not as bad as that thing that happened to Dad. You know, that was a high watermark, and so it's good for perspective. So this is called Crushed. Like a paper cup, some dumb thing. But so what? Lots more where that came from. Sliver of blue morning. Much is interchangeable, but not this. And this is nothing in comparison, I know, to my father's 1,000 days of let me go. And now it's his blue evening, every evening forevermore. They zipped him in a bag and wheeled him from the house. Light snow that night. The weather saves me daily. So much else is bullshit. He planted these roses once upon a time with his bare hands. A perfectly good problem. Some anger returns, some sadness. Hello and welcome. I was raised to make the best of it. My father would give me a wink. It was easy to be seen then. Heartbreaking blue most every evening now. I've had this one question so long. I look for the answer in old photographs of him. It isn't there, but I look. Or in the clouds, like everyone does. Clouds make the best of the wind. I'd like to run my finger along their edges, if they have edges. In one dream, we sat side by side as his coffin was lowered into the ground. Another night, he told me I was safe. We can't see ourselves ever, really. What if there isn't any way to touch? In the dream, he was wearing a light jacket. I'm going to ask you for your questions again in a minute. This is called How Would You Like It? The indignity at the end, I tell myself to tell you. No one would want this, though no one is asked. Times he was left naked on the too high bed, not allowed to eat or forced to, talked to like a child, just ignored, broken like a piece of furniture, or crying out an animal in a trap, no hope. So this is what Jesus is all about, and purgatory, if we are to believe in it still. Guilt calls me out. Times I waited in the kitchen while the nurse cared for him. And then we pretended best we could, all is well. Off to bed, each one alone. He had to lie there. This was a small portion of life, though it felt long. As I recall, my father dead and gone, almost a year. Any questions you want to ask?
Was your interpretation of like God or religion like really changed after the death of the prophet, or have you always just been kind of weird with religion?
Well, so the question was about God and religion and my perspective changing, right, in recent years, maybe, kind of. Yeah. So, well, I guess I would say I went to Catholic school, like all the way to Mary Ann High School and all of that. And I've always been a person who has a lot of like, interesting. Even as a small child, I had what I would think of as healthy doubt or whatever. And it's interesting to see, I have many siblings and people, everybody has kind of their own feeling about it or whatever. So I'm probably like the most kind of out there one, but I just, definitely believe in all of that kind of thing, but not the way it was taught in school. That's just silliness to me. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Okay. Yeah. But certainly when you see someone suffering up close like that, it does shake you to your core. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love the variety of your titles. Like sometimes it's a list or like a mini catalog, or then it's like a phrase, a familiar phrase, or then sometimes it's the ferocity of sunset, and so, and how do you have an instinct for your feelings towards titles when you're deciding?
I love titles. They're the easiest thing for me. I wish I could just do titles all the time. I always have a lot of them. Again, I keep lists of them in my phone, and I keep like today in the craft talk, we were talking about the Renaissance Fair, believe it or not, and about the lack of ATMs at the Renaissance Fair, which just sounds that sounds like a prose poem right there. And we talked about scarcity, and I wrote down the word scarcity. I was like, that is a great word. And as I said in the class, scarcity sounds like, a little bit of sandpaper, the S's and the C's in scarcity have a beautiful sound to them. Now, what will I do with scarcity? I don't know, but it will be a title, probably. I won't sit down and be like, I'm going to write a poem about scarcity. It's much more likely to be about the weather today and the tent and the not tent and meeting all of you and going back to a place that you haven't been in a long time, and probably something that I don't know yet. But it's going to be under the umbrella of scarcity. So my titles are often kind of a little bit of a angle from the poems themselves. They don't tend to label the poems very much, which you probably have noticed. They're not like, I have some poems called On Vulnerability, On Benevolence, but they're kind of a little different. Question over?
Yeah, I appreciate your conversation on titles there. I think titles are about the worst part of writing poems. Very frustrating. Okay, you asked about your religion and how your faith changed. I want to talk about your writing and how that would change through your experience with your father. We kind of learned, certainly with Professor Marcus, but with all of the creative writing faculty, you write about the same experiences a lot. You're kind of going back, and I think that ties back to your history, not knowing or not. When you wrote about your father, what was something that maybe one factor in that process about yourself or your relationship with your father that maybe you didn't realize before writing about it?
Let me think about that. Certainly those are very, very difficult poems to write. He still turns up in poems. It's just the initial poems of how to write, like the one that I just read to you about. He was left naked on this too-high bed. That's a pretty direct narrative line. That's actually kind of hard for me, and to figure out how to describe that. My father was for 9 months at Woodward Hills. Some of you may be familiar with, right on Woodward, and it was a classic experience. And we were like, he's got to get into Woodward Hills. It's the best. And then we got there, and it was a total freaking nightmare. But that doesn't mean it is for everybody. Someone said to us ahead of time, it's better if you can talk. If you can't talk, any place is going to be hard. And that became really obvious. So anyway, we were trying to be with him all the time. And there was a time I arrived, and I come around the corner into the room, and there he is on a cold day, naked on this bed, way, way off the ground. So unsafe and disrespectful. And I went cuckoo crazy, screaming at this nurse who was, I don't know, and which wasn't really nice of me or whatever. So maybe that's what I learned, kind of my own, the depths of my ability to be angry. sort of the fury of that, something. So writing those kind of poems of just trying to kind of describe just these most mundane things, because the feelings, and this is kind of the mystery thing, the feelings are so huge, like my father's dying or whatever. And because I'm the youngest, and I think that, and I think probably my siblings would agree with this, that I was probably the closest to my dad. I lived alone with him, just the two of us, and nobody else ever had that experience. And I lived with him when I was an adult, and that's different than just being a child with a parent. And so yeah, I certainly learned a lot about myself and about him. And also the depths of his ability to care for us. Even, I was coming back to Michigan like twice a month, which is a lot of driving from West Virginia. And often when I would leave, he couldn't move his right, so he always used the left hand because he was paralyzed on the right. And he would always go like this, like keep fighting, it's all good or whatever. And a lot of people would not have that wherewithal to give that to somebody else when they are like stuck in a bed waiting to have their depends changed. Yeah, it was like hardcore. Okay, I'm going to read you a little bit of nonfiction. So last couple of years, I've been doing a few different things, and one of them is writing these sort of flash nonfiction pieces, well under 1,000 words. And they tend to have a little bit, I know the poems can be really serious and intense, and they also can be funny at times, because that's how life is. It's a mix of things, but I think these are probably a little bit lighter, so maybe that'll give you a little bit of a break. So this is called Famous Men. I went into the jewelry store in need of a little pick-me-up. Just looking, not buying. No particular reason, which surely is a reason, as everybody comes to know. The conversation was already in process. Sightings of famous men. Robert Redford was the star of the story, as he probably always is whenever he shows up. I'd be excited too if I saw him. I added Robert Plant to the list. Once I stayed a whole week at a shabby, expensive hotel where he and his band of pirates also stayed. I wasn't even a big fan then, but I knew him when I saw him come strolling, ambling, shambling out onto the hotel patio for fancy breakfast. The sky was super blue, a cool but promising morning, and everyone had Mexican blankets across their laps for warmth. The perfect touch the hotel was known for, even though the knob came right off the shower, and the to-do list must have been long. No one could have written the scene any better. That night, my sister read from his Wikipedia entry, and we learned he had been knighted, and we began to refer to him as Sir Plant when we alerted each other to sightings, which were plentiful, in the hotel bar and on a balcony, and famously, to us, in the hot tub with all the other pirates, as they told stories of the road, or so we assumed. We were on the other side of the pool, watching but not watching, super casual, as of course we have never actually been, all the while trying to buy tickets for his sold-out show. So we bought the tickets, and they turned out to be fake, but we got in anyway because my sister and I look nice, and we are, and by then we had lost all perspective, and she was treating and paid what had to be paid for standing room only, and I encouraged her. The women in the jewelry store were impressed. Other stories were offered. Bruce Willis, Chuck Woolery, the stakes were getting lower, but still. So I bought the earrings, these actually, which were zircon, which is real and not to be confused with zirconia. Peachy pink for grounding, I guess, or for healing or hope, as is usually the case and almost always needed. And then I asked about the ponies that I knew lived at the store. This place being in a little town where such things were more typical than not. Around back, I was told. And I made my way past 3 very good-looking chickens and a quite awful scarecrow with a woman's wig, which I assumed did the job. The ponies stopped eating and looked up and said hello, when I said hello. They seemed interested enough, but on the whole, used to this sort of thing. Walking back down the gravel path was not dissimilar to the morning after the concert. Same blue sky, but Sir Plant and his brand of magic and trouble long gone. I clutched the bag with the earrings. It was tied with a ribbon. I decided that that alone made me feel a little better, and is often the way, a little worse. How are we on time? Okay, that sounds good. So I'm gonna read you some new poems from an even newer manuscript. Beginning of the pandemic, how many sentences begin that way? I decided to reread The Plague by Camus, which I had read in English, and I had also read haltingly in a French class here at OU. And when that happens, you don't really know what's going on when you read a book in another language like that. But anyway, I was like, I'm going to read this. And it was, if anyone's read it recently, it's really frightening because you're just like, yeah, I know what he's talking about now. This is, yeah. And so anyway, this is a little poem that references Camus. It's called Everything Filtered Through Something Else. Oh, is that the rain? That's so exciting. Okay, that's perfect. Yay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now we want the weather so that the tent collapses. Right? Okay. Everything filtered through something else. Not quite the end. The main characters swim in the ocean. It's after dark, 50 pages to go, a reprieve. How did Camus know to do that? Most days, edges overlap, so I guess this is still the middle. Or a thing reverberates a long time and grows famous. I'm used to it, but not quite over it. What hurt me? At the cemetery, I water the flowers, clip the grass and weeds. The reason to make art is to be yourself before it's too late. What do you hope to remember from the experience? I don't want contentment to be out of the question. The better part of a day. This is a long poem, a little longer than I normally have, 20 some lines. So just so you can prepare your listening. Thinking about loneliness as a beginning. For sight, the snow. For touch, the snow. For sound, for smell, for taste. Am I grounded now? The recipe says, careful with the almond extract. I am making a wedding cake type cake. There are some secrets, and now I know them. I don't feel better yet, but maybe soon. Remember, look interested. Zoom taught me. Helps the little scrunched up spot between the eyes too. Third eye working overtime feels like. I trust myself anyway. I smile now at no one and sugar some cranberries, 2 sprigs of rosemary for a winter landscape. Naturally, there's a lot of downtime. I dip in and out of books at will, famous poets and what they're so famous for. Novels and why so big. White Snow, Bright Snow, read aloud from 1947, a real gem. And that one I could climb inside. If only is a theme, try as I might. Always kind of thinking about God also, the overall situation, what's what, belief. Must be nice, my father once said, to have a simple faith. Doubt is part of it, for sure. Gotta have that. Okay, I won't pray for outcomes, though I'd rather not slip and fall walking later. We'll take the small miracles of the cakes not sinking, the buttercream perfectly creamy, the snow falling just like the book says, softly, gently, in the secret night. And yes, rabbits do make long, funny rabbit tracks. I saw just this morning. Or they stir in their sleep, deep in their warm burrows. I imagine them myself, under the ground, under the snow. I'm going to read you one more poem. I was a big fan, was and am, of Nancy Drew. And she appears in this poem, and I've always kind of thought of myself as a kind of Nancy. And part of this poem references an English department meeting, a West Virginia English department meeting that was held over Zoom. which is awesome because then you can eat cereal out of the box while people are talking and stuff. And if those of you in an English department as faculty know, there's always a lot of people who are the nodders, you know, and I'm always just like, not a nodder. Anyway, so English department meeting is in here, Wallace Stevens, Stevie Nicks, Nancy Drew, there's a lot. It's a little poem though. This is called I'd Like to Make an Announcement. Nancy Drew minus Nancy. I look around. Skies open and shut. I can't read another thing. No one warms you, I tell myself. Warns, I mean, geez. And then tears in the grocery store because my mother will never again eat a meal she loves. Cut to the meeting and the queens of nodding. I'm on mute, eating cereal from the box. Who cares in heaven? I mean it. The day went from this to Stevens to Stevie Nicks. The size of things as they are. I took my love, I took it down. Ever since my parents died, clouds don't look the same. Thank you so much for listening.
Announce some good questions in the chat too.
Oh, sure.
Keep an eye. Let's see.
Okay, so Kevin
Oh.
said hi. Olivia Carpenter wanted to know. We're looking at your chat now, everyone.
There's a question about inspiration. Where does inspiration come from or whatever? I don't really believe in it. I mentioned this today in the craft talk. I just kind of alluded to the fact I didn't believe in inspiration or in writer's block. I'm just not choosing to do it. Some days I just don't want to do it. But I just feel like the inspiration, there's stuff happening all the time. We could all write a poem right now. One thing I was going to say is that, you know, I was at Oakland, you know, left in 92, came back, taught for a while, was back over the years for various things, but it's been a while. And there's a lot more money around here now than there used to be. Things look a lot different than they did. If I were to write a poem right now, it would include the rain, the tent, the soggy tent, you all in your mask, the banquet room, scarcity, wood paneled walls. There's a ton of stuff to say, right? And something that I don't know yet because I haven't written a poem. Because poems are written line by line, and you really do discover something a moment at a time, I think. So that's, you know, inspiration is kind of always there. Just sometimes you just don't have the time. You've got to grade some papers or walk the dog or something like that. It's actually a big help to, you know, to say that there's no such thing as writer's block. People are upset by that, but that's actually kind of letting you off the hook in some ways. It's actually way easier. You're just choosing to do it sometimes and not other times. It's not some big crazy thing out there like now I will be a poet and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, when I was in graduate school at Virginia, I was in school with a few people who would like dress up to write their poems. Like now I'm going to put on my poet clothes or whatever. That sounds really tiring. I don't really know how to, you know, I guess mine are slippers or something. I don't know. There are no poet clothes. I'm sure that they know that now, probably. Other questions? Concerns?
I mentioned like rose bushes a couple times. I was just curious if the significance of that.
Well,
Repeat the question.
oh, yeah, sure. So the question was about rose bushes, that I've mentioned roses a few times. Well, my dad grew a lot of roses, and I do as well. I probably have 25 in my yard, and most of them are English roses, and they have great names like Jude the Obscure is a rose who's really frail. I mean, like, of course, that same rose has died on me so many times. I'm like, I guess I will order the Jude. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's very like, it's ready to give up the ghost almost every minute. There's one named Sweet Juliet that I've been trying to get. She's always sold out, whatever that means. Anyway, they have these great names. And so I just really love roses. Something my dad was a big gardener, and I would say all my sisters and I like to garden as well. And that's probably what it is. One of my sisters was kind of just getting into things. She said, are there roses without thorns? And I was like, oh, honey, no. I mean, I think there are a few varieties, but like, that's not the point. I mean, that you kind of take the whole thing, right? Yeah.
How much do you look for?
How much do I what? love my poems. I love them a lot, actually. Yeah, I think you have to. I remember many, many years ago, somebody was like, who's your favorite poet? Or I mean, I think you have to be your own favorite poet because like I'm following my lead. You know what I mean? It's like it's my investigation. There are certainly books that I love, poets that I love. Charles Wright was a teacher of mine. I love Charles's work. He was a tremendous person. Is a tremendous person, was a tremendous teacher for me. But I don't love his work more than the discoveries I've made in my own. And I don't think that that's egotistical. You got to love your own stuff. It doesn't mean you think it's perfect or anything, but that you enjoy your way of being in the world. Otherwise, you could change it, probably. There's another question somewhere. Yeah.
I was just wondering how come, I guess because like I grew up with technology, so like you're very connected with like brother and niece. Yeah, I was wondering where that love came from.
Well, I was so lucky to grow up without technology. There just wasn't any of that. I was just talking with someone yesterday about, remember when the phone was on the wall and your finger would hurt from dialing it and you'd be like, never mind, I don't want to call that kid again. I didn't have the energy for that. That was great. And you would leave the house and you would have no idea if anybody called. And sometimes you couldn't leave the house because your mom would be like, grandma's going to call. We can't go anywhere. And then like answering machines came, you know, and then like the phone and all of that. I mean, I love my phone too, but it's not, I don't think it's super great or whatever. I grew up, I was a little girl in the 1970s and I love that era and I love the music of that era. And things weren't perfect, obviously, but there's something about it. And when I see it in movies sometimes too, it'll have kind of a certain, movies of the era are, the lighting seems to be a certain way. And I was like, I remember that lighting. The world was in that lighting. So I think that's part of it. And then having, you know, my parents were born in the 1930s. So there was no, I remember when MTV started, I was like in 5th grade and these other kids were talking about it. And I was just like, what? And we didn't have cable TV. We were still like walking up to the TV to change the station and stuff. And I was happy with that.
Speaking of technology.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Pete?
Question, Mary.
Sure.
I guess I got 2 questions and I've got more than that, but I'll ask them later. In your poems, who is your speaker speaking to? I think this will be useful to my students. And then the second part is, you mentioned you kind of keep this ongoing list of titles.
Mhm.
Your poems, like to me, each line is sort of a layer on top of the line. And I'm wondering if you also sort of just keep a running tab of just cool lines that you come up with and then you collage them together? Or?
No, I have titles and then I'll go with the title for a while on the phone and then I transfer it to the computer or something. No, it's lines too. Yeah. Not all of my poems work this way, but they have for quite a few years now. Almost every line is an end stop thing, and every line I think of it as being like handed to you, handed to you, handed to you. So I really write this unit at a time. It might be this long, it might be this long, it might be, you know, yeah, so you can hear that, I think, and it makes the poems also seem very aphoristic sometimes as well, or like Zen koans or something like that. Now, who am I speaking to? It depends on the poem, kind of. I didn't read a lot of these poems like this, but if the poem is kind of a love poem, then it's usually the you is usually that other person. And these other poems that are about my dad, I guess it would just be sort of a general audience. I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, but I'm always trying really, really hard to be, you know, you want to be fully yourself in a poem. So you might as well just do it all the time so that you don't have to like put it on and take it off like that poet clothing kind of thing. So like Nancy Drew, she should definitely make an appearance if she's in my, you know, in my understanding of myself or whatever. I try to just write in exactly, people say like, I can't write about such and such. It's like, all right, then just write the line. I cannot write about such and such. Just, right. So I think a lot of times people are making it too hard. The poem is out there. And I said this earlier in the craft talk that right when I was at the end of my MFA, Charles Wright said to me, and he always spoke in like, talk about like Zen master or whatever. He always said very mysterious things and brought almost nothing to class but a pencil and sometimes a knife to sharpen it and stuff. And this is what I aspire to in my final years, whatever. But this is like pre-assessment era teaching. He said to me, you write a poem like an acorn. which I knew was a compliment. Acorn's a beautiful thing, but you got to crack that thing open to get to it. Right? It's food for the right, eater, like a squirrel or whatever. And I knew what he was saying. The poems needed to loosen up a little bit. They were very beautiful and kind of faceted and stuff, but they weren't always that available. And I think I've become better at that, partly by being like, okay, Nancy Drew, okay, Dad left on the bed naked. Okay, nothing is kind of off limits and it's all available. So yes, the answers both of those questions, maybe. Okay. How about those two? And then we'll...
Two things. One of my friends not have a phone, which is like I always feel like a fun fact because her husband works here, so if there's a problem, like they just go get each other. And my other thing is like you say you like write lines on your phone, like you still write on paper, and like is that a different process for you?
No, I write on paper sometimes as well. When I say I write a line on the phone, I don't mean that I write like a paragraph and then I chop it into lines. I mean, I write a line and I go down to so I'm trained myself to hear it as a line, to write it as a line. It's a line from the very beginning. I'm not one of those spill it, chop it up poets. And some people ascribe to that. For my students, I'm always like, don't do that. Or if you're doing it, don't tell me about it. Because lineation, that's like one of the big things about what is this genre? It's line, it's the music of poetry. It's not just my feelings said briefly. It's the music of this line and this line and this line. And we talked today in the Q&A about metrical verse and the value of learning that. And for many, many years, I scanned every line of my poems. Even you can scan free verse, you're just not going to end up with trochaic tetrameter. You're not going to be able to put those labels on them, but you can always hear stressed and unstressed patterns. So, yeah. I like the idea of not having a phone. I'm kind of surprised Pete has a phone. Yeah, I had a colleague who didn't have a phone until he became our program director. When it was his turn to become program director, he realized he probably had to have a phone.
I was wondering, you said you took a break from writing for 8 or 9 months after your father passed. What brought you back? Was there?
Well, I wanted to write, I just couldn't. Yeah, and it was actually after he had the stroke. He didn't die for another 3.5 years, but yeah, I just was unable to. My life was so upended, my schedule, how often I was coming back to Michigan, which had always been a lot, but suddenly was like twice a month, in a kind of a leaving at 4 a.m. kind of way to get there as soon as possible. For another sister had left so that he wasn't alone. Even though my dad had care in our home and various facilities, one of us kids was with him, I would say about 95% of the time during those 3.5 years, which was serious coordination because most of us lived out of state. And we would have these huge master schedules. And so it was just feeling like I wasn't myself anymore. I didn't know who I was without. I used to talk to my dad multiple times a week and asking him, how's the weather? What did you have for breakfast? I love that kind of stuff from people. So to lose that was like, it's hard to write when you're grieving. Let's see. I'm just going to quickly answer these 2 questions on the chat. One of them is about editing and proofreading and how much do I do before publishing? Well, I don't send anything out till I think it's done, obviously, because the poetry world, they're not going to work with you on the work. It's either going to get accepted or rejected. It's not going to be workshopped out in the world. And so it's very clean by the time I send it out. Right? Each line has really clicked into place. And I don't have any questions about it. And when it comes back rejected, I don't rework the whole thing. That just means those people on that day didn't like it. If I still like it, it just keeps going out. Right? Some of my favorite poems, though, have had the hardest time being published, and that's always the case. And then a question about West Virginia and Michigan. Would I like to be there or someplace else? I would like to be here. This is my home, and I feel it super, super strongly. But I've also lived in West Virginia for 20 years, and I know it very well. And it's a beautiful state. It's a great place, and I've loved my job. But Michigan is, I just know where I am, right? The whole hand thing and everything. And West Virginia is a very hard place to give directions in. It's kind of like, I can't really. I could go with you, but I can't tell you. I can see it. It's like 3 ridges over from here. I can see Target over there, but as the crow flies, it'd be easy. But as the roads go, I don't know how to help you with that. You know, like turn at the Dairy Mart or whatever, the dollar, not the dollar, I'm blanking on the name. There's like a little convenience store, like little general convenience store or something like that. It's really hard place to feel located in, and it really matters to me when I'm here to feel like Michigan's over here and like Huron's over here. I always have that feeling when I'm in Michigan.
What a cool line to end on. I love that.
Thank you so much.
And help yourselves to more food. Someone also asked in this chat, when will the recording be available? Probably in a little bit over a week. This will be available on the Creative Writing Program's YouTube channel. So if you wanted to share it with anyone, but for our Zoom crowd, you can see it again there as well. Thank you again so much for coming, everybody. Have a great night. And books for sale in the back. Thank you.